want to thank everybody for logging on with us tonight. I'm John Foster. I'm a librarian here in the Adult Information Services Department, Manor Public Library. Tonight we have with us Weinkamer, who's the lead volunteer at the James A. Garfield Historical Site. Is that correct?
Yes.
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 All right, perfect. We really are fortunate to be in each other's orbit, so to speak. I think that we are pretty much ready to go. So I am going to thank you so much, Debbie Weinkamer, for being here with us. And here we go.
Thank you, John. My screen says M. Lintern because I'm in the office of Ranger Mary Lintern. That's where we're broadcasting from tonight. And the folks here at James A. Garfield National Historic Site are always pleased to do some partnership with the Manor Library. We are just a few blocks away. We do many things together. And so once again, it's a good evening for us to partner in having a program. And as it turns out, it's a beautiful night for an evening walk. Now, normally we would be walking and taking this tour, but other restrictions have caused us to take the tour inside. And so even though we have a beautiful May evening, we're going to let you sit back and relax and take an armchair traveler's tour of the Garfield family's neighborhood. You'll have to catch Lucretia Garfield another time, and there are some recordings through the library that you can see presentations by her, and also with her son, James R. So you may want to look those up in a future visit to the library site. This tour was actually started by Ranger Joan and I back in 2002. We were taking folks on house tours and people would say, I've driven past the Garfield site my entire life and this is the first time I've come inside. And so Joan and I realized, oh, they probably don't realize how many clues are along Manor Avenue to tell folks that the Garfield family had a real influence on this area. And so we devised this tour. In 2005, Ranger Alan Gephardt revived the tour as part of the National Park Service's initiative to get folks outside, get them to the out of doors, and get them exercising. And so if you partake in this tour in its normal fashion, you would get to walk east and west of the Garfield home for about a 90-minute walk. Tonight, we won't be able to give you all your steps on your devices, but hopefully you'll be able to do that in the near future. Our tour actually begins before the Garfields moved to Mentor, and it starts with the Corning family. Warren Corning Sr. owned a square mile of land around the intersection of what we know as Center Street and Manor Avenue. And he was one of the first settlers in the area. He and his wife Elizabeth had 9 children. And starting in the 1830s, he began to divide his land holdings amongst those 9 children. His youngest child was Harriet, and she married James Dickey in 1835 and received a farm that would one day belong to James and Lucretia Garfield. In the map you see in front of you, the gray shaded area is Harriet and James Dickey's farm. They were given this parcel along with a little 2-room house as a wedding gift from their parents. And the portion that is blue was a brother of James Dickey's, belonged to George Dickey. Now, unfortunately, in 1855, James Dickey died and left Harriet as a widow with 3 children in this farm. So she was preparing to sell this and get out from under it and, in a modern term, downsize like we would know today. In October of 1876, Congressman Garfield took the advice of several friends and came to Mentor to look over the Dickey farm, about 119 acres that Harriet was selling, and they made a deal. He sent this note that you see below his picture to his wife. So, my darling, You shall have a home and a cow. He quickly acquired the blue portion next to Harriet's property, so that gave him almost 160-acre farm. The green portion on the map is Mrs. Alvord's Grove, and we'll get to that parcel a little later. This is a photograph of the Dickey Garfield farmhouse. This is the only photograph we have of the farm from that era, and it's just hard to envision that Garfield and his family moved into this 9-room house with the accompanying acreage. This was their home in the district for Congressman Garfield. He represented the 19th District of Ohio, and this would mostly be their summer home when Congress was in recess. They had some sprucing up to do to get it to look to this point. It was quite run down, and Garfield and some hired hands made some appropriate improvements, moved some buildings, moved the pigsty away from the house so this scent wouldn't waft into the parlor. Their first overnight stay wasn't until May 2nd of 1877, even though they purchased the farm in October of 1876. Between 1880 and 1904, there were several enlargements and improvements to the property made. You get to hear about those on our normal house tour and also on our behind the scenes tour. This map shows an enlarged area, much bigger than the Garfield farm. By the turn of the century, the last century, sadly, the president had been assassinated, but the family continued to live on the farm property that now was known as Lawnfield, and you see that towards the bottom of this map on your screen. The 5 children grew up, got married, had homes of their own, some staying close to their widowed mother. One of the daughters-in-law, Helen, who was married to second son, James R., hired a landscape architect in 1900 in order to consolidate all the adjacent properties that the family was living on into one compound. And that was approximately 400 acres along Manor Avenue. And that's what this map is showing. J. Wilkinson Elliott was the landscape architect. The folks at the Lake County History Center have the original document that is huge. It's the size of a table, showing this layout of these Garfield properties and the trees and the other points of interest like driveways and walkways. Now, by the 1900s, there were several country estates spread out on these properties with immediate family members and extended family. If we walk out what is now the James A. Garfield National Historic Site driveway and turn to our left and go east along Manor Avenue on the north side, the first property we encounter is the one who has the house pictured in front of you. And this was called East Lawn. It was first built by Warren Corning Jr., another one of those Corning children, in the 1830s. It's a Jonathan Goldsmith house that had the front door facing Manor Avenue, about the third of the size of the white house that's there now. The fancy door that you see pictured in the upper left is one of Jonathan Goldsmith's doors that is in the Cleveland Museum of Art. And we think that the front door to the Corning house looks similar. Oldest son, Harry Garfield, lived here with his mother-in-law, his wife, and his children, mostly as a summer home. Harry Garfield's mother-in-law, Carrie Robinson Mason, purchased the house around 1900 from James Garfield's old neighbor, E.T.C. Aldrich. And she nearly tripled the size of the house by 1903, with fourth son, Abram Garfield, being the architect. The house changes hands to another aspect of the family in 1926 when Harry Garfield's wife, Belle, sells the house to his nephew, John Newell Garfield. And then later the house was sold to Faith Lutheran Church in 1953, and it serves today as their fellowship hall or their parish hall. And that's what most of the folks watching this will recognize. Immediately east of the church nowadays is the Samuel and Jeanette Dodge House. And you might not even notice this house. In the lower right-hand picture is a colonial white house that sits quite a ways back from Manor Avenue. So driving past to the mall, you may just totally pass it and never notice it. But around the turn of the last century, about 1920 actually, it looked like the upper left picture. The house had awnings and the main entrance faced east towards East Lawn. The owner of the house, Samuel Dodge, lived in Euclid Heights with his family, but they wanted a house in the country. And so they built this house in 1920. Its current owners are Clyde C. Haddon Jr. and his wife and children. And the Dodge house marked the far eastern edge of the Garfield family compound. We're continuing on east down the street on the north side, and many of you will recognize this house because when you go by it, it's been one of those things in the neighborhood for a long time. This is another of those Corning children's homes. This is Nathan Corning's house. And it sits closer to the intersection of Center Street and Manor Avenue. Again, a Jonathan Goldsmith house built in the 1830s. It was built to house Nathan and his wife's family, but also Nathan's parents. So there actually were two entrances to the house so they could have separate living quarters. You may know it as the Corning White House because over the years here in Manor, this building has housed other businesses like a law office, insurance firm, an antique shop, and still busy today, although it sadly needs some much needed TLC. Next to the Corning House is the Mentor Village School and the Mentor Village offices. The school itself was built in 1859. And in 1880, during that time period when James Garfield was running his front porch campaign and he was president-elect, his two youngest boys attended school here. And those are the two children in the ovals that you see to the right of the photograph. In the yellow oval is Irvin, about 10 years old at the time that he went to school here. And his younger brother is below him in the red oval. And that's Abram, the architect we've been talking about. This school was replaced by Center Street Village School in 1914 that sat a little further back from the avenue. And now is the Center Street Village School condominiums. There's also some businesses in the building. There's a law firm and some hair salons. The Village Hall that's on the left of the school, as you look at the photograph, has recently gone through a wonderful restoration. You may all remember going past and watching the white paint being removed from the red brick structure. It's a very handsome building once again. And the folks who are in there, NMS Incorporated, are CPAs. And they have a beautiful building. They're wonderful stewards of the property. If you ever get a chance to go inside, you'll very much appreciate what they've done with the interior. There are maps and Mentor memorabilia, and it's just a lovely structure now, being used or reused, I guess, here in the 21st century. Now we are at the corner of Center Street and Manor Avenue, and some of you are wondering, why haven't we talked about the Manor Library's main branch building? We walked right past it to get to the Corning House. Well, that building wasn't there when the Garfield family was really inhabiting the neighborhood. There was a lending library that was a subscription library, and then the first free library was built later. What you're looking at in front of you is the first free Mentor Public Library, a very Western Reserve structure that was designed and built by Abram Garfield. His name keeps coming up, but that fourth son in the family had a real talent for designing these buildings. This structure was built on the northeast corner of Manor Avenue and Center Street in 1903, when the Library Association finally had raised enough money to buy their own property and to open their own building. The Garfields were so instrumental in getting this library started. Ranger Allen and I did a program a little more than a year ago about the Garfield's influence on the Menor Library, and it's a recorded program that you can find if you look through the holdings at the Menor Library YouTube site. But they had very much to do with establishing this first public library in Mentor. Now, you folks may recognize it as the current confectionery cupboard, because this building was moved north on Center Street to 7300 Center Street in Nolan back in 1960. And there have been a number of things in this building since then, insurance company and a florist that some of you are familiar with. But today it's the confectionery cupboard with the little pink door, as you see in the bottom right picture. The current Mentor Library, the main branch that was originally called the Garfield branch, was built in 1960 and was expanded in 1981 and 1990. So that's the one we're all familiar with. But you probably pass the old one on 615 or Center Street as you're going about the area. Behind the library, as you would have headed east at the corner of Center Street and Manor Avenue, was a business block that had businesses that were some in brick structures, some in framed structures, and a number of things came and went from that area. There was a delicatessen and a barber shop and an ice cream shop, some offices. Now you'll find a tire, automobile fix-it place that Ranger Mary likes to use. And there's also a tattoo parlor over there. If we look across the street to the southeast corner of Center Street and Manor Avenue, by 1920, there was this wonderful store, Snells Grocery, or a general store. And the picture is worth 1,000 words. Ranger Allen found this wonderful picture showing Mr. Snell there behind the lady with the baby carriage. And you can see the assortment that was available in the store to all the Mentor Village shoppers. One of those kinds of stores that has gone out of fashion, but was very appropriate in its day. Near the store, there also was, next slide, a service station, a full service gas station run by the Snell family, where you could get your gas pumped by the attendants. You didn't have to leave your automobile. They would check your battery and your tires and clean your windshield back in the days when service was really vital. If we look across the street from the Snells establishments to the southwest corner at Center Street and Manor Avenue, there was the Center Street Mill. This started in 1906 when a post and beam barn was moved to that spot. And the Center Street Mill was called Mentor Elevator for a while too. That's what it was called when I moved out to Mentor in the 1960s. But it was one of those places that had grains ground, but also provided cat food and other animal types of Purina chow, lots of hardware items too. So that was a real mainstay for a while. If you go to that spot now, you will find the FedEx office print and ship center. and Howard Hanna, realtor on that corner. We're going to continue walking down the south side of Manor Avenue. And as we do, we're going to take a blast back into the past when Manor Avenue was a dirt road, about 1.5 lanes wide. And along the south side, you'll see tracks in this black and white photograph. And those tracks are from the Cleveland, Painesville, and Eastern Interurban Railway, which came down Manor Avenue, began operation in July of 1896, so brought electricity to the area, and the tracks were run down the south side. Mrs. Garfield's house was stop 55 on the Interurban. So it was very convenient for not only her, but her son, James R., who had a law office in Cleveland, and other folks in the area to ride the rails down to Cleveland, do their business for the day, and then come back out to the country in the evening. Our friends watching today, I think, are very familiar with the interurban buildings that still exist in downtown Willoughby. Willoughby Brewing was the repair shop for the interurban, and Soul Restaurant was the power substation. The street itself began getting paved in bricks in 1915, and the brick pavement moved east and west from Center Street out along Manor Avenue. And if you see a really good pothole nowadays in the avenue, you'll see some of the brick substructures still there. I'm told it still exists beneath the pavement. Now, you may have noticed the pillars in the last picture. And here's a closer view of the pillars with their wonderful landscaping around there. And the pillars were put in during that landscape plan of the Garfields in order to denote either driveways or walkways onto the family compound. The tall pillars show you where the driveways were. The shorter pillars were where the walkways are. And if you were either a Garfield family member or one of the guests that came out to visit them, once you pulled into the driveway with your vehicle, you could park and walk amongst 4 or 5 families' properties without ever going back on the avenue again. As you drive along Manor Avenue today, or as you take the walk, you'll notice these pillars are still there. And they are really in pretty fine condition for their age. It's that coarse ashlar sandstone, that's that Berea sandstone that's very popular in northeastern Ohio. And the folks who live by these pillars now seem to be taking really good care of them. We're going to cross Manor Avenue at Hollycroft Lane, and we're going to continue down the street for a little ways. The street was given the name from this house, Hollycroft, named by the second son, James R. Garfield. It was his home beginning in the 1890s. Now, James R., who's very dapper looking in that top photograph to the right, was a lawyer who had law office downtown in Cleveland. He married Helen Newell, who's beneath him there on your screen, in December of 1890. Helen was quite the social debutante. Her father was the president of the Lakeshore and Michigan Southern Railway out of Chicago. And so they had a wonderful Christmas time wedding in December of 1890. And then they came to Mentor to make their home. James R. purchased Mrs. Alvord's grove. He purchased the 20 acres adjoining the Lawnfield property to the west and built a home about 300 yards northwest of his mother's house, Lawnfield. And this is the house. You get to see it here in the photograph. It was a wonderful 35-room dwelling with sleeping porches, the oval windows you can see on the front. The property itself was really known for its spacious grounds and trees, wonderful gardens and floral displays, and a tennis court. And it became known as the Big House. Mrs. Garfield's home, Lawnfield, became the Old House with only 29 rooms. But this picture is wonderful because you see a bicycle out front and you see the rocking chairs on the front porch and just the little touches that show you that the family's living there. James and Helen had 4 sons. And a very special guest visited here in 1912 and 1914. They kept a guest book, and this guest book was donated by a Garfield family descendant to the Garfield site here. And we've had it on display a couple times. And you will get to hear more about that special visitor during those years when you take the walking tour. The property doesn't have a very cheerful ending, I'm afraid. The house itself was converted into apartments in the 1950s, and a fire gutted the structure February 24th, 1965. It was written up in the local papers. The structure had to be torn down, and the land itself was subdivided into residential lots and condominiums. If you walk down Hollycroft now and get to, let's see the address, 6228 Hollycroft Lane, you'll see condominiums there, basically sitting in the approximate location where this house sat. Okay. The property to the immediate west of Hollycroft was called Willowbrook Farm. And the black and white photograph shows this wonderful estate that was built by Helen's brother, John E. Newell. So an extended family member. He had workings in the coal industry, had an office in the Union Trust building in downtown Cleveland, but he, like lots of folks, wanted a home in the country. You know, people headed out either to the Heights south of Cleveland or out to Willoughby or Wickliffe or to Manor to get away from all the industrialization and the bad air that they were creating with their businesses. And John Newell was one of them, purchasing about 65 acres in the early 1900s. The Newell family's 3-story colonial style house stood where a swimming pool is today. And it overlooked a scenic pond that you can see in the photograph that's still there. The Mentor book that tells the history of the first 200 years of the city and village says that a boathouse provided shelter from the wind and was a convenient spot for lacing up skates in the wintertime. At the left side of the black and white photograph, you can see a carriage house that still exists today. And it has a wonderful new name. It's called Eleanor B. Garfield Park. And that's what many of you know the property as. But why is it called Eleanor Garfield Park? We frequently get asked here at the Garfield site. Well, it's named after Eleanor Barton Garfield, a granddaughter-in-law of the 20th president and his wife. Eleanor Barton married Rudolph Hills Garfield, and they had 2 sons and a daughter. They lived in a white colonial house that still exists on Hollycroft Lane that was near the Hollycroft estate. That building is still there. If you go down Hollycroft, as you travel north, it'll be on the left-hand side where the road takes a bend. But unfortunately, Eleanor was widowed in 1946, and she was left with 2 sons to take care of and was able to purchase the red tenant house here at Lawnfield from the Garfield family in 1948 to downsize and raise her family. Now, she would complain to her father-in-law, James R., about the various things in the city. You know, the sewer wasn't a good system. We needed more development here, more of a tax base. He finally said, Eleanor, why don't you run for mayor? So she took him up on it. And in 1952, she ran for mayor against two gentlemen, and she won. And she has been our only female mayor here in Mentor. And she was quite a character. Eleanor, no nonsense woman. You can see the postcard to the right that she handed out when she was running for mayor. She's carrying a bushel basket with leaves, and she was out working in the yard. She was just a down-to-earth person who would say it like it was, but she had a great sense of humor. And I'm sorry that I never got to meet her. There are other folks here at the Garfield site who did. You can see her all dressed up, the bottom left there, as the mayor. And her office was in the village hall that you see in the center of the screen with that wonderful brick structure that's just been renovated. So she really made an impact on the area. When she was the mayor, she helped get the water and sewer systems up to snuff, and is the reason that we have our industrial corridor along Tyler Boulevard today. In 1958, Eleanor led a group of citizens to raise funds to purchase the Newell estate to make it a park for the area. And she got her good friend Leonard Hanna to match the funds that she was able to get raised. And it was the first private community park here in Mentor. In 1980, the city purchased it and named it in Eleanor's honor. Now, I thought I would end with talking about a couple of other interesting neighbors that were in the extended neighborhood. You know, Lucretia Garfield lived till 1918, so she saw a few people move in that had these large farm estates. And the first one was Liberty Holden. He had the home that you see in the upper right-hand side. He purchased the J.P. Robeson Farm. This was James Garfield's good friend and mentor who had the farm there. And Liberty Holden purchased that farm in 1906. Some of you may know of him as being one of the owner publishers of the Cleveland Plain Dealer. He also was the proprietor of the Hollenden House. So his farm, Goodhold Farm, eventually grew to about 1,200 acres, which was quite huge. It was the largest in Mentor and had beef and milk cows on the property, fruits and vegetable gardens. And all of the produce and the milk that was raised there, grown there, I guess you could say, was used at the Hollenden Hotel down in downtown Cleveland. Now he needed a barn, and he wanted a big barn. You know, if you have a large farm, you want to have an appropriate sized barn. So he enlisted Abram Garfield once again to build a barn for his farm. And most of us that are veterans of the Mentor area know it as Bargain Fair. In the 1960s, it became a wonderful shopping area where you could find a little bit of everything. To get downstairs in the Bargain Fair, you actually walk down a cattle ramp to get to the lower level. So it maintained its barn look the whole time, but it's sort of fun to see modern cars of the era parked out front of Liberty Holden's barn. It was torn down in 1969. So the neighbor across the street was Edward Moore. And his driveway entrance was about where the Olive Garden driveway is now. There's a traffic light there where you can get to Taco Bell or Olive Garden. And so his driveway would have come out to Manor Avenue about in that location. And he had these wonderful pillars that you see in the black and white photograph and a gravel driveway that went up to his cottage, his summer cottage. And Edward Moore was a partner with Henry Everett in the CP&E Interurban Railway. So he brought the electricity to the area, and his house and property was all on the south side of Manor Avenue, across from Goodhold Farm, across from Liberty Holden's farm. It grew to over 1,300 acres of unbroken land that covered not only Manor, but Willoughby and Kirtland. And his little 12,000 square foot cottage was completed in 1900. It was the first home in Lake County to have electricity. And his driveway was interurban stop 52 and a half. Of course, he would have an interurban stop there. His main entrance had the ornamental brick columns. His estate by 1913 had grown and had 3 working farms on it, stables, greenhouses, apple orchards, formal rose gardens, reflecting ponds, a swimming pool, and the first private golf course in Lake County. And this is where the barn envy comes in, because he decided he needed to compete with Liberty Holden across the road and have some huge structure built as his barn. I guess you could say there was a friendly Hatfield and McCoy feud over who would have the biggest barn in Lake County. You know the house as Moreland, the lower right-hand photograph in colors, the way it looks today. And of course, it's been restored to be an event space for Lakeland Community College. Well, this armchair tour was designed to be just a then and now look at the community, to give you an idea of what the Garfield family saw in the late 19th and early 20th century. And even though our landscape in this area, immediate area, has changed from that rural one that the Garfields knew, there's still remnants of the environment that they knew all around us. And where the remnants are missing, we have photographs. We feel that James Garfield and his family continue to make a mark on this area, which their descendants still do, and which our James A. Garfield National Historic Site adds to, and fortunately remains to this day. So keep an eye out for many Garfield related sites nearby, all around you here in Lake and Geauga County, not just Mentor. And watch out for street names: Lucretia Court, Hollycroft, Garfield Road, all around you. And I'm hoping that some of you had a couple of "I didn't know that" moments while you watch this presentation. Thank you for joining us. We encourage you to come and take a neighborhood walking tour when they're brought back, when they resume. And